Hello, everyone. Today I'm looking at Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Overall, I enjoyed this book, but all the enjoyment was kind of near the beginning, and as it went on, it just kind of tapered off, and there were some moments here and there, but I don't know. I'm just such a big fan of Mice and Men, and that's such a small, concentrated story, and here it gets more drawn out. There's more kind of drama, more characters, and it loses its main focus. It becomes more about the characters rather than the idea it's trying to drive home. And honestly, I was just so curious about this book for so long, because how do you get that wrath in those grapes? How do you do that? What's the deal here? And well, I won't give it away at first, but to set the setting, I mean, Steinbeck, he always did well. As I can see with this, my second Steinbeck book, he's definitely dealing with very, I wouldn't even say low class, but like simple folk, real simple folk. You can be poor, but at least be aware. And it's just the general struggles of, you could say poor, but simple people, I would say, is the more direct way to say it. So the story revolves around a man named Tom Joad, and his family, and also the Wilsons, I believe, and their family. And the main setting, or the main thing is that it's, I believe, I'm actually not sure, I think the 30s or something, and it's during the Depression, and all the jobs have dried up, and everyone is basically moving out west to California. So everyone from Oklahoma, Kansas, everywhere, they're all going to California, almost like a second gold rush, but this time it's for jobs. It's for working on the farms, essentially, picking pears, picking oranges, picking grapes. And Tom, the main character, I actually really love, like I said, I love the opening. I love how they introduce him, because the tone of the book reminded me a lot of No Country for Old Men at first. And the opening scene, or not the direct opening scene, but like the second scene where it talks about, it actually, it's funny, it starts off from the perspective of this, I think, truck driver, or this like jalopy, whatever, like guy who's just driving his like pickup down the road, and he picks up a hitchhiker, and he says something like, oh, well, he drives this truck which is working for this company, and they have a company policy, no hitchhikers, because he's transporting chickens or eggs or something. And Tom, comes up to him, he's a bigger man, and says, well, would you give me a lift, sir? He says, oh, no, it's company policy. Don't you see the sign? Blah, blah, blah. And then Tom basically says back, well, I know I've seen the sign, but I still would like to believe there are good people out there that would help a folk in need. So, and then it goes into the guy's perspective running through, well, if I don't help him, that means I'm not a good guy. And he goes through all the calculus. And so he says, all right, fine, I'll give you a lift. And I love how that scene plays out, because what essentially happens is it's just small talk. It's just very basic small talk. And this is really, I think, a sign of a great author. Even though I didn't super like this book, I think that Steinbeck has a certain way of just setting scenes, getting dialogue to flow decently well. Sometimes it's a bit stunted and jolted or just slow, but sometimes it flows really nicely. And in this opening scene, you get the case where, I think a good writer should be able to turn anything simple into something interesting and complex. You don't need sci-fi or fantasy. If you can make a simple car ride between two guys suspenseful, that's the trick. And of course, what happens is, over the course of this pickup truck ride, they're just talking, going back and forth, where you've been, where you're from, what you've done. And Tom says, oh, I spent 4 years up in McAllister. And it goes to the guy's process, saying, well, there's not much work up in McAllister except for the penitentiary. And then he starts to get going and thinking that you've been in jail for the past 4 years. And so suddenly he realizes this guy that convinced him to give him a ride in his pickup is actually a guy who is a murderer, homicide, and he says, and I love how he explains. He says, homicide. That's a big old word for meaning that I killed a man. And as he's getting out of the car, he leans into the car and tells him what really happened, which is that he was at some dance hall or something, or some folk dance, and he had been he had been stabbed by, I didn't get the context, but he had stabbed by some other guy, and in the course of that, Tom basically, despite being stabbed, beat the guy to death. And so it was kind of, they gave him a very light sentence. It was totally justified in self-defense, et cetera, et cetera. And he had good parole, and he's supposed to be in 8 years, but he got it in 4 for good behavior. And but yeah, it's just this really suspenseful moment that I could totally see out of No Country for Old Men, where they're just driving along, simple talking, and they get to realizing that this guy in the seat that's next to him is actually a murderer. But what kind of murderer? Well, we find out as Tom is our main character, he's actually a very upstanding guy. He's a very decent, well-meaning guy who just got in trouble with the law, and the government and the companies and the factory farms all become kind of the invisible the antagonist of this book. And so Tom, basically, he's being driven up to his old folks' home, and so he finally gets there, finds his old house, and it's totally not demolished, but it's totally in disrepair. Like the piping's been pulled out, or no, the piping hasn't been pulled out. So he thought at first it was robbed or something, but all the valuable metals and stuff are left there. And he's really scratching his head thinking, okay, where's Ma and Pa? Where's where's everyone else? My grandparents. And turns out, because the house is it's been like semi-destroyed, and it looks like it's been ransacked, but nothing's been stolen. So it's a real mystery. And he comes across this preacher named Casey. And Casey's an interesting character. He's kind of important, actually, to the overall plot. And it's interesting that he's the first character that Tom kind of comes across. And he's this random guy on the road that Tom's walking by, and he says hello, and he says, "Oh, I know you. You're Casey the preacher." And so Casey, he kind of opens up to John, and they have a conversation about the fact that Casey's issue as a preacher is that he would get to preaching out in the wilderness, and he'd get everyone whipped up. I don't know what the term is for the proselytizers, the like Baptist types, where they love the Word of God, speaking in tongues, and that kind of thing, and they get into the energy of it. And so Casey's big issue is that he stopped preaching because every time he would do the big ceremony and whip everyone up into a frenzy, it become almost like a rock concert or something, and people would get infatuated with him, and he'd end up basically sleeping with random women. And when that would happen, he'd feel super guilty afterwards, because he's supposed to be the voice of reason, and how we won't commit sin ever again. And so eventually he just he couldn't live with himself being both a priest and not a prostitute, but a promiscuous person. And so he eventually ended up quitting because the guilt and the cognitive dissonance of those two things tore him apart. And then Tom basically says, "Oh no, I've done the same thing, but I wasn't preaching. It's just a natural thing." And so he ends up having Casey confess these things and have Casey realize that, it's not that bad. And then Tom basically says, "Well, you just need a wife to rustle down." Basically, he says, "I know these here Jehovah's Witnesses come by the barn once in a while. They stayed with us and did their preaching, did their sermons, did their services and work." And he says that wife took a pounding every night, kind of thing. So you just need a wife. And so it gets Casey kind of revitalized, like, yeah, I can be a preacher and also not a degenerate if I just get married. Kind of, okay. And so Casey becomes part of the main kind of cast and goes in and out of the story. And so eventually he says, "Well, I'm just trying to find my folks." And so Casey says, "Oh yeah, they went down the road to so-and-so's place, I believe the Wilsons." And so Tom basically comes with him, and they walk down the way. and he reunites with his family. And it turns out what happened to his family home is that it was attacked or semi-demolished by the landowning company. And the way it describes it is they're like, we've lived on this land. My grandpappy, he fought the gosh darn Indians to earn this land. He fought tooth and nail, and we're living here. We're not moving, kind of thing. And apparently the land that they're resting on doesn't belong to them and was sold to some mysterious company. And one day a bulldozer shows up and he says, look, I've been paid to bulldoze down this thing. And they're like, well, it's like, should I kill you? It's like, if I can't kill you, then I'll kill the guy who hired you. And he's like, you can do whatever you want, mister, but I'm getting paid to bulldoze this house, and it's got to be done by today. And if you're in it, you're in it, and if you're not, you're not, kind of thing. And so they end up bulldozing the house only partially and saying, well, that's good enough, because they're not going to live there, and basically clear it, because whatever land they're on, they're going to be used for the new landowner to put something on it, presumably farmland or something. But then again, there wasn't really farmland there to begin with. So you get the idea. These people are like, they're dirt poor, they've got nothing, and then the government or the big company comes and takes away what little they had, and essentially all of these people who are being forced off their land, they're being forced to go find real jobs and real work, because all the work is dried up because of the Depression, and they're all going out to California. And it's funny, later on in the story, you get this, they're pulled over by the California police people who act more like almost a mafia, and they say, we don't want no Okies up in California. So they even have like a slang and a slur for these people, which I find really funny. And Steinbeck, the way he describes it, is that they called them Okies because they knew they were strong and the landowners were weak, and that if they started squatting, there would be no way to get them off. So I found that to be super, super interesting. So anyway, that's kind of the intro, the beginning, and the rest of the story is about Tom and his mother and his father and his two grandparents, and the other main characters. There's two kids, Ruthie and Wilson or Winslow, I think, who are like younger kids who show up later, and there's also Connie and Rosa Sharon, or Rosharon, as they sometimes abbreviate it. And the thing with them is that Rose of Sharon is pregnant, and apparently Rose of Sharon is named after a bush out in the desert, so it's a plant or something, or a rose or something. And so Rosharon, Rose of Sharon, whatever, she's pregnant, newly pregnant, and Connie is her new husband, who's kind of like, uh-oh, I didn't mean for this to happen. And they're kind of working it out, figuring out what to do. And they said, well, you're pregnant, but we gotta go. So she's got a baby in her, and she's going across the country to basically find new opportunity, new land, a new job, etc. And yeah, that's pretty much how the rest of the story goes out. And it talks about, the middle part is all about their journey, finding a jalopy, finding a refurbished car that they can take and that'll get them across to California. And then the last third of the book is about their actual lives in California. And what's interesting, I think, about the diatribe in the book is, you can kind of, there's the idea of the font size there. So I guess that's one thing I would say. This book, it is about 4.5, just over 400 pages, 450 pages. And yeah, it's just not worth that amount of time. It's like, as more time goes on, it loses its spice and its flavor and its impact, and it just doesn't become anything more than what it was, in a way. There are some scenes here and there, but especially how it ends. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger. It ends on a, well, that happened moment. It was just like, okay, whatever. I would have ended it at least a chapter or two before, but it was a very strange note to end on. It wasn't a big finale. It was like, oh, well, someone went to the washroom kind of thing. But yeah, no, it's what's interesting about the structure of the book is that you'll have a couple chapters of, Tom and talking to Ma, talking to Pa, this happens, and there are lots of dialogue, lots of back and forth. And then every fourth or fifth chapter, you'll get this narrative that is almost like like a narrator in a movie, or almost from Steinbeck himself, where he's doing this poetic talking about, you know, the used car salesman who's going to get you to California. Like, no, that's too much, that's too little. Put the price on there, fix that up, 25, maybe 29 bucks, and throw in a seat for free. You get a free tire here, free tire there. Don't worry, 29 for a Jalopy Play. I bought it for 30. That's too much of a risk, a cash cow, and it just goes on like this, whatever. And it's a stream of consciousness, a diatribe. And there are certain parts in this book where Steinbeck is kind of, again, talking about things more philosophically as to what exactly is going on. And honestly, this was the best part, some of the best parts of the book, where he gives a poetic narrative over it. And I think the other best parts of the book rather, is some of the small dialogue pieces, like between the driver and Tom, figuring out, you know, he's from fresh out of jail. There's one scene where his mom goes into like they just picked their first batch of peaches, and she goes in to purchase things from the company store, and everything's overpriced, and there's a shopkeeper who's giggling about how he's ripping them off, and she finds some way to get under his skin and saying, oh, well, you know, it's just a darn shame I couldn't get a pound of sugar or something. Like I'll take it now and pay you later. And they have a little back and forth that's interesting. And there's a scene, well, spoilers, when Connie ends up leaving Rose of Sharon and just leaves, just bye. He's gone, and she's pregnant, and she's still there. And what are some good scenes? They have a standoff with a bunch of police. They have this dance where, you know, they're all kind of getting together, and, you know, the kind of different dynamics that are occurring. There's a scene where later on, what's his name? Casey the preacher ends up becoming the organizer of a strike against the company, who's paying them to pick peaches for half what the other company's paying, and it's not even enough to live on, and he ends up getting intimidated by the police, and something happens with him and John, or Tom rather, and there's a lot of really cool things that happen, and it's really great for its narrative, but there are just some pieces in here that I thought were oddly relevant to today. And I guess this book must have been written in, I don't know, I guess the 40s, the 50s, but it's about the 30s. And I read a certain passage, and I'd like to find it and read it to you guys, because it very much reflects what's going on in California right now. And I guess it was new, but from the way that this is written, it sounds like it's always been this way. And I'm just going to find it, because it was such an interesting way. Because even though I think Steinbeck's magic is that he talks about simple people, but he makes it complex, and he makes it interesting, and he drives at the real motivations and the heart of the characters. And there's kind of this thing that you could have a bunch of hillbillies, but he'll find a way to humanize them, to turn them into these dynamic creatures with their own struggles that aren't that different from anyone else's. They just express themselves differently, but there's still the passion and the vibrance behind their words. And that's the main thing about what they're talking about, the what they're getting paid and whatnot, and the whole aspect and the real purpose behind the book is around union busting, and that's where the Grapes of Wrath come in. Is that they're here to pick grapes and peaches and oranges and whatever, but they're not being paid enough to even live. And it goes into this diatribe about what the feeling was at that time and the anger that was bubbling up from the people because of how poorly they were being treated. Okay, I found it. So this is a bit long. It's about 2 pages or a page and a half, but what they describe in here is very relevant, I think, to what's happening right now in California. So I'm just going to read it to you guys. Once California belonged to Mexico and its land to Mexicans, and a horde of tattered, feverish Americans poured in. And such was their hunger for land that they took the land, stole Sutter's land, Guerrero's land, took the grants and broke them up and growled and quarreled over them, those frantic, hungry men. And they guarded with guns the land they had stolen. They put up houses and barns. They turned the earth and planted crops, and these things were possession, and possession was ownership. The Mexicans were weak and fed. They could not resist because they wanted nothing in the world as ferociously as the Americans wanted land. Then, with time, the squatters were no longer squatters, but owners, and their children grew up and had children on the land. And the hunger was gone from them, the feral hunger, the gnawing, tearing hunger for land, for water and earth and the good sky over it, for the green threshing grass, for the swelling roots. They had these things so completely that they did not know about them anymore. They had no more the stomach-tearing lust for a rich acre and a shining blade to plow it, for seed and a windmill beating its wings in the air. They arose in the dark no more to hear the sleepy birds first chittering, and the morning wind around the house while they waited for the first light to go out to the dear acres. These things were lost. The crops were reckoned in dollars, and land was valued by principal plus interest, and crops were bought and sold before they were planted. Then crop failure, drought, and flood were no longer little deaths within life, but simple losses of money. And all their love was thinned with money. And all their fierceness dribbled away in interest until they were no longer farmers at all, but little shopkeepers of crops, little manufacturers who must sell before they can make. Then those farmers who were not good shopkeepers lost their land to good shopkeepers. No matter how clever, how loving a man might be with earth and growing things, he could not survive if he were not also a good shopkeeper. And as time went on, the businessmen had the farms, and the farms grew larger, but there were fewer of them. Now farming became industry, and the owners followed Rome, although they did not know it. They imported slaves, although they did not call them slaves. Chinese, Japanese, Mexicans, Filipinos. They live on rice and beans. The businessmen said, they don't need much. They wouldn't know what to do with good wages. Why, look at how they live. Why, look at what they eat. And if they get funny, deport them. And all the time the farms grew larger and the owners fewer. And there were pitifully few farmers on the land anymore. And the imported serfs were beaten and frightened and starved until some went home again, and some few grew fierce and were killed or driven from the country. And the farms grew larger and the owners fewer. And the crops changed. Fruit trees took the place of grain fields, and vegetables to feed the world spread out on the bottoms. Lettuce, cauliflower, artichokes, potatoes, stoop crops. A man may stand to use a scythe, a plow, a pitchfork, but he must crawl like a bug between the rows of lettuce. He must bend his back and pull his long bag between the cotton rows. He must go on his knees like a penitent across a cauliflower patch. And it came about that owners no longer worked on their farms. They farmed on paper. And they forgot the land, the smell, the feel of it, and remembered only that they owned it, remembered only what they gained and lost by it. And some of the farms grew so large that one man could not even conceive of them anymore. so large that it took batteries of bookkeepers to keep track of interest and gain and loss, chemists to test the soil, to replenish, straw bosses to see that the stooping men were moving along the rows as swiftly as the material of their bodies could stand. Then such a farmer really became a storekeeper and kept a store. He paid the men and sold them food and took the money back. And after a while, he did not pay the men at all and saved bookkeeping. So, there it is, the story of California from the perspective of the 30s to today has not changed. And we're all acting like it's new and different, and apparently it was never like different. It was always like this. So all of this conflict and imported slave labor, hello, it's not new. And it seems like, and this is where it goes and ties into the main theme of the story. It's in the wrath of the people. And I literally, oh, there it is. Literally, boom, right there. I love that. When I find what I'm looking for. And so what happens is, and I think it's like, and to give you context, right? They give about a nickel per box of pears, at least, that they pick, and it can't be bruised, and they have an inspector checking the pears if they're bruised, and you get 5 cents per box picking out in the orchards. And so Tom and his parents and the little kids even go out and start picking pears and putting them in boxes to earn food. And by the end of the day, they do about 20 boxes, and that's about $1. And that's enough for 2 pieces of meat for like all the men, a jug of coffee, a little bit of sugar, and what else do they buy? Coffee, sugar, meat, I think dough or something. Oh no, a loaf of bread. So, and that's $1. So that's a day's work. And so it gives you that example where they do maybe a half day, almost a full day's worth of work, and that's enough just to feed them. Meanwhile, the company has like a company housing, which is just a wooden shack in the middle of nowhere with like greasy floors that the ma has to clean. So they are in a state where if they work, they can earn just enough to feed themselves and live. And there's a few other places along the road where they stop at this government camp where the police aren't allowed to enter it, and they have these sanitary units, which are just toilets and like, not porta potties, but basically, like public toilets that they're like, oh my God, sanitation unit, public housing or whatever. And they have a whole housing committee there, and everyone kind of works together and, helps each other and feeds each other and helps them get along. And so on the way to California, again, they confront policemen and locals. There's this one where it's kind of like a gang almost that appears out of when they stop their car, and they got a shotgun and he's got a bottle of whiskey, and he says, "Where are y'all from?" And they're like, "Oklahoma." And like, "Bunch of Okies coming out of California. We're full, boy. Head on home." So they get confronted by the police. They get confronted by the locals who already are kind of at capacity, and if more people come in, it'll more imported slave labor will drive down the wages even more. And so they all speak the same language. They're all the same ethnic background, but they all still have conflict. And what's going on in California now, it's like, right, this is the same thing that's going on. You have these people that, you could argue it's worse, that are coming from hundreds of miles away, that aren't even from Mexico, that are even people who fly in from, I've heard stories of people all the way from like China to Uzbekistan to Nigeria to North Africa who fly into the countries just south of Mexico into Panama and, I'm going to say Belarus, no, the Bolivia and all these other countries, and then they end up making the trek up for hopes of you know, of a better life or better jobs. And, you know, I mean, you can't really blame him, right? But at the same time, you know, you get this feeling that it might have been better almost to stay home, considering what they go through. There's gangs and MS-13 or whatever, and like, you know, the cartels really run Mexico rather than the government, it seems. So it seems like the amount of stress that they go through to get up there is so onerous. It's almost like a question of, is it even kind of worth it? But yeah, it's the same story. Like, is it worth it to? And there are certain characters who decide not to go on the journey. They stay behind they look after like the family's dog, or they just stay behind and be single and lonely in a shack somewhere. Oh God, there's this terrible story about this used car salesman who got one eye, and he's always going on about, oh, no one likes me because I got one eye. And then he has this rich friend who's trying to like invite him out to things, but he's like, no, I got one eye, I'm ugly. And Tom is like, well, I've had about enough of your belly aching. You know, God gave you one life and two eyes, and just because you lost one of the eyes doesn't mean you give up on life, and that kind of thing. And the guy who has all this negative mindset, I mean, he's a very sad character and a very brief character. And I do like that, where there are a lot of vignettes in here. A lot of vignettes like, oh, that could go into like, I don't know, a video game or into a movie as like a scene. And, you know, I still have the cinematography of No Country as I read through this and try to get that lighting and those camera angles as I'm reading through these scenes as they're happening. But yeah, mostly it's a pretty kind of emotional story. You know, on the way there, both of the grandparents end up dying on the road. The grandmother shortly after the grandfather from almost natural causes. There's confrontation, there's a bit of drama, but overall it's nothing amazing. Like I as much as I liked it, it wasn't amazing. Oh yeah, and I forgot the biggest thing where it finally talks about, did I read this part? I totally sidetracked, I didn't read this part. Right, so the people come with nets to fish for potatoes in the river, and the guards hold them back. They come in rattling cars down to get the dumped oranges, but the kerosene is sprayed. And they stand still and watch the potatoes float by, listen to the screaming pigs being killed in a ditch and covered with quicklime, watch the mountains of oranges slop down to a putrefying ooze. And in the eyes of the people, there is the failure, and in the eyes of the hungry, there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people, the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage. And so this is where the grapes of wrath come into play, which is that with all the stuff going on, with all the opposition of, you know, I'm just trying to earn enough to really just to eat, and even the meat they get, they say it's grizzled and there's mostly fat and there's not really a lot of meat on it, and they're just getting pushed around by the locals, by the government, by the companies who want to keep the wages down, so then they can't even eat. And so they're trying to, you know, make $1 a day just to feed their family, and then another company doesn't like that, and they're busting down and say, well, we're going to pay you $2.50 for a box rather than 5 cents. And then the striking starts happening, and what happens is like the pressure, the pain, the struggle that the whole family goes through, and all the characters. And Connie leaves Sharon, and Sharon's stuck there pregnant, and Ma and the grandparents die, and it's kind of sad and kind of tragic, but it's more kind of like you're seeing them keep on pushing and going, and you want to see, you know, how far they get, where they go on this journey where they're just trying to like survive. If they don't get a job, they're literally going to die. And through all this pain and through all this struggle, they finally make it to the land, and it even says the land of milk and honey. It says this ain't the land of milk and honey, where they're, you know, squeezing you by the, you know, like a rag. We're trying to get every last, you know, drop out of you in terms of how much they pay you. And throughout this whole process, what ends up occurring is how slimy and scummy these companies are. And so really it is, you know, fighting the man, fighting the system. And what they end up doing is that in the midst of all of this suffering and this struggle and the driving down of prices, is the companies, these faceless, you know, ominous companies, decide that, you know what, In order to keep the price of our product, oranges, peaches, and grapes, competitive in the market, because we own all of it, because we're basically a monopoly at this point, they start to create artificial scarcity, which means that, as they said in that chapter, they take the oranges, all the excess oranges that they could perfectly good to eat, perfectly good to sell, and they get the drivers to drive them to the middle of the desert, douse them in kerosene, light them on fire. They take the pigs, perfectly good meat, slaughter them, and bury them in the ground with a quicklime. And the grapes, I forgot what they said about the grapes, but specifically, because they said, where was it? Oh, yeah. Yeah, the little farmers watched debt creep up on them like the tide. They sprayed the trees and sold no crop. They pruned and grafted and could not pick the crop. And the men of knowledge had worked and considered the fruit is rotting in the ground and decaying, and the decaying mash in the wine vats is poisoning the air. And taste the wine, no grape flavor at all, just sulfur and tannic acid and alcohol. So even the grapes are rotten and destroyed, and the wine they make from them is watered down with all this acid and just, it's alcohol, but it's the worst kind of alcohol that you could get. It's not even really wine. It's more like, vinegar or something, and with alcohol in it. And so they're just making nothing. They're destroying the fruits of the earth, the gifts of nature, and they're destroying it for the sake of profit. And they're destroying people's lives for the sake of profit. And they're creating mass suffering for the sake of profit. And what happens is it begins to ferment in the people is the wrath. And the grapes of wrath is that the people say enough is enough, we're going on strike, and we're fighting against the companies. And similar to the union busting and the Pinkertons and all that kind of style of story is kind of the main drive of this book. And so, I don't know what's going on in America right now by the time this video comes out, but it seems to be a similar situation where you have a bunch of people that are being asked to come into the country and work for nothing, and then being asked to leave and get out, and what are they going to pay them? What aren't they going to pay them? Why not give those jobs to Americans if they can even are willing to take those wages? Which, of course, if you hire locally, those wages are going to go up. So I don't know what's going to happen, but all I know is that there's going to be a lot of wrath. And I think on the news I saw that there's a bunch of riots in LA. LA always has riots, apparently, not as bad as Paris, but they're always in a state of they're in an escalated state of chaos recently, and this is why this gives you the flavor and the feeling of what those people must be feeling. And so this is kind of weirdly relevant. I just wanted to know about how the wrath got in the grapes, but I got something else out of it as well. So you can definitely understand and see the whole thing, the whole tapestry of it. And for me, my big takeaway from this book is the way he describes the hunger and the waves of hunger. The people who first took the land, the Americans who took that land, how they kept it, and how they grew weak in the land, and how then the hunger of the people who wanted to work came to that land, and the hunger of the squatters and the people there became the new owners, and then they stole the land back, or for them and for themselves. The original people probably aren't alive anymore. It's about, I don't know, ultimately it's about the hunger. It's about not just wanting something, but needing something. And that need, that desperate hunger, and you can see it in Tom's and the way he talks, his family, his struggles, like they have nothing but themselves and the shirts on their back and an empty stomach. And what do you do when you got an empty stomach and your children got empty stomachs and your parents got empty stomachs and you're a man. Boom. So yeah, no, I mean, for all of that bravado, I guess I did enjoy reading the book. It's just that it could have been shorter. It could have been way shorter. There's just a lot of dialogue that you kind of have to get through, where it's like the mom talking to the kids and the kids, messing around with the toilet. And these are all vignettes, and these are all fine and nice, but not all the vignettes are super interesting. They're just like, okay, well, this was a funny thing that happened, or that was a funny thing that happened, or that was a sad thing, or it was a happy thing. And, it's a series of vignettes along with Steinbeck's narrative. And Steinbeck's narrative about the actual topic. I think if you, cut out all the dialogue and just kept Steinbeck's narrative as a book itself, it might have been less than 50 pages, but I think it'd be probably less than 20 pages. It'd be a lot more, it had a lot more flavor. It'd be a different book for sure, but it'd be interesting to see what it would read like if that was just the whole thing. But yeah, that's Grapes of Wrath. Don't know much else to say about it. I know there's a movie. I'm probably gonna watch it after reading this. I like Steinbeck's writing. I like how he can take very simple situations, like it's like, like in the American Midwest and the West in general and cowboy stories, there's nothing, right? There's no giant mechanical beings, there's no frost giants, there's no big mythical thing. It's just people trying to survive. And that's the main line, that if you nail that, then you can intersperse all the stuff and all the flavor of fantasy you want around it. But getting that basic drive of the people and their struggle direct, it's kind of the main thing. The ending. So I kind of like the vibe up until near the ending, and I'm not exactly sure exactly what was going on, but it was kind of like it was winter, and the work had all dried up because you had to rotate fields and trees and whatever, and so there was no fruit left to pick. And so during the downtime, what happened is, along with winter comes the flood season, or maybe it was fall, I don't know. But anyway, the rainfall comes, and they get these floods. And there's this giant flood that comes by, and the men are digging a ditch, and as they're digging the ditch, the torrents come and it washes away their precious jalopy that they, this beat up piece of junk car that they paid so much money just to get them to California, ends up being washed away. And meanwhile, they're getting Rosa Sharon higher and higher onto the top of the hill, onto higher ground, because she's about to give birth, and it's this big, messy, total chaos, this chaotic moment that was really kind of, exciting. It's like the families, they're beat, they're tired, and this is like the last thing that they need. And it's like the force of nature. It's like God testing them. And I think it's a interesting way to end off the story, that it's a deluge. It's like the flood, right? It's in a way it's very similar to Noah's story, where it's just him and his family, and they're just they just want to survive. And so you just have this imagery of this torrent, of this force of nature coming against them, and they do everything they can to fight against it, and they do end up, surviving and whatever, and avoiding the chaos. And I don't think anyone dies in that scene or anything. But it's this big moment, and it reminds me a lot of some of my favorite endings to certain movies, Akira and Rock-a-Doodle-Doo. I know this is two very different tones of things, but and at the end of Akira, you have this giant. Well, it's not really a. Well, you have a bunch of explosions in Kira's body, whatever, but then you have this scene of the rain comes, and then the dark clouds, and you have the sunlight piercing through the clouds, and the storm clears, and you have this fallacy where the world is rejuvenated, and there's new clouds in the sky, and sun is new. And just like after the flood, you have this feeling, like if you've ever been through a big storm, it's this feeling that the world is renewed through this great struggle. And in Rockadoodle, they have this similar thing where I don't really remember exactly what's going on, but I just remember as a kid, the imagery and the vibe of that final scene where there's a flood and like the barn is destroyed, and they have these planks of wood just floating in the water, and they're just struggling to stay afloat. You have these evil owls or something, and they end up being destroyed by, a lightning bolt or something through their hubris and arrogance. But you just have this sense of unbelievable chaos, and the fact that they struggle through it, and they come out the other side, and there's this salvation waiting for them. There's a new world and a new horizon and a new life that reveals itself, and it's something that's reflected in the external environment, also internally, that they've just overcome so much that they earn their salvation through their struggles, I guess. And yeah, I don't know, that's just the imagery just really hit really hard. And then after that, they just have this weird scene where the last scene of the book itself is Rosa Sharon, and I think she's still pregnant, and she's lying down on a mattress, and she ends up they end up coming upon this, this old guy and his son, and they all leave, and she ends up seducing the son or something, and then the book ends. It's like, okay, I didn't need that last part. It was and it didn't even go into any details. It wasn't graphic or anything. It was just a weird thing to end on. It was and she got him. I was like, oh, good. And she didn't even really play a huge part in the story, but it just it's kind of, yeah, it just ended. And she smiled mysteriously, that's it. And then that's Grapes of Wrath. So yeah, it's not bad, but I feel I don't know, I'm kind of hedging the idea that the movie is maybe a more digestible way. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know, but it's just a little bit long, so that's the main thing. It's just a little bit long, and it could have just been shorter, I guess, but it's a pretty decent story. Maybe I'll end with this because I highlighted this, so it must be good, obviously, as a way to close this out. They sat and looked at it and burned it into their memories. How'll it be not to know what lands outside the door? How if you wake up in the night and know the willow tree's not there? Can you live without the willow tree? Well, no, you can't. The willow tree is you. The pain on the mattress there, that dreadful pain, that's you. So, kind of you are defined by your pain, you're defined by the struggles, and you're defined by what you overcome. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, would I recommend it? Again, probably not. It's just a little bit too long, but if you do end up having to read it, it's not a bad book at all. But yeah, there we go, another book done. Anyway, guys, thank you again, as always, for listening, and as always, keep reading.